What innocent question has someone asked you that secretly crushed you a little on the inside? Back when I was first getting my start in media production, I got contracted to create the cover art for a DVD case. And for those of you who may not remember, a DVD was a movie that you could only watch after yelling at a black box for a few minutes. I viewed my role as being my big break in the business, and I was certain that I'd quickly develop a reputation as a guy who could be counted on to create the best work that anyone had ever seen. I may just have been slightly overconfident. Anyway, I worked for days on the design, carefully assembling and retouching all of the images and text until I had created an unmitigated masterpiece. It was, as far as I was concerned, the single best example of cover art to have ever existed. In actuality, it looked rather like a cat had eaten a magazine and then thrown it back up onto a scrap of black paper. When the time finally came for me to present my work to the producer, I was ready to receive absurd amounts of praise. "Oh, that's not bad," she told me. "When can we expect the finished product?" While I did manage to stumble my way through a brief reassurance that something better would be forthcoming, I was utterly devastated by the response, as well-meaning as it had been. Fortunately, it gave me an opportunity to ask what needed to be fixed. I framed it as making sure we had the same ideas in mind. And I did make significant improvements over the next couple of days. That was ultimately unnecessary, though, because the director's wife came up with her own concept for some cover art, and her work got used instead of mine. Honestly, they probably made the right decision. Pretty sure my design doesn't usually sell very well. I never thought I'd see the day when someone would have to explain what a DVD was, as if it was, like, old news. I guess I'm old news. Comment down below if you're with me. Story 2. When I was younger, I was raised by my mom and her husband. They had been together since I was a child. When I was in primary school, my younger brother, my mom and her husband's son, learned to talk. I asked if I could also call him Dad. When I was in high school, I was visiting with my biological father and his wife, only saw them once a year and sometimes years without seeing them, and said something about my mom and dad. My stepmother asked me when I was with them to refer to my stepfather by his name, not his dad. That crushed me because I was told that the man who raised me, who was by my side when I was sick, who went to all my sporting events, was not my father in someone's eyes. He's the greatest father anyone could ask for. He raised a child that was not his at 22, and he loves and takes care of me just like I'm his biological child. I will never call him anything other than Dad. Story 3. My father passed away almost 2 years ago. A few months ago, my tire blew as I was pulling into my driveway. I'm a single female. My brother lives in another state, and my brother-in-law is over an hour away. I wasn't about to call him on a work night for that. I was going to call AAA to come the next day and thought, who cares? My father taught me how to change a tire when I was a teenager. Between that and YouTube, surely I can do this alone. So I did. I went out there and changed that tire, and it was awesome. It took a while, but the guys at work said I did a good job and the tires were on well, which I was most afraid about. Fast forward a few weeks, and I'm with my friend in her big truck and a tire blew. She went on and on about refusing to change it, and I told her you'd be surprised and that if we had to, I could do it. She's very pregnant, so no way she was going to do it. She was able to get her dad there pretty quickly. I know she didn't mean this the way it came across, but after we got back in the car, she said, "I've got a husband and a father. I don't have to change my own tire." That hurt more than I'll ever tell her. Story 4. Not me, but I witnessed it, and it was so awkward that I guess I'd consider it crushingly uncomfortable. My husband's boss is a middle-aged professional woman, the kind that lives, breathes, and eats work. She always acted so sad for us when we were pregnant and my husband would talk about the baby. She made a lot of, "I could never handle kids," or "I don't want to have to sacrifice my lifestyle" kind of comments, which is totally understandable. I understand why people wouldn't want kids. A few weeks later, his other boss let it slip that the lady boss' daughter was in town. We were so confused, but male boss was confident that she had a daughter. Weird. So me, being the stalker I am, Googled his lady boss and found out she actually has 2 daughters, both of which seem like successful, decent kids. One's in med school. A few more weeks go by, and we are out for a little company get-together to celebrate my husband landing a full-time position. We still act like we have no idea about her kids because it's clearly something that she doesn't want to talk about. While we were having some drinks, another coworker asks if she has kids and she kinda stumbles over her words before basically saying, I did once. A coworker didn't let it go and was starting to ask about the kids, so my husband promptly changed the subject. Maybe it's not that weird, but the persistence and prodding by the other coworker was definitely awkward. Dude, just hearing that past tense was like enough for me to put a break on my thoughts, but that coworker didn't even think about stopping there. She just kept going on and on, picking and prodding. Ouch. Story 5. I was at my SO's family's house for Easter. He and I were outside smoking, and one of the kids came up to me and asked why I was smoking. I responded with, sometimes adults make poor decisions. This is my go-to answer when a kid asks me why I smoke. Her response got me right in the heartstrings. She said, why do you want to end? Ugh. So of course I said, you know what? You're right. I don't want to end. This is a bad and gross thing that I'm doing, and proceeded to put my cigarette out. For a little backstory, my mom passed away in October 2017 from lung cancer that spread to her brain. This little child did not know that or know me before Easter this year. It was heart-wrenching to hear this little one call me out on my bad behavior. I'm currently working on quitting, but it's not an easy process. Story 6. What are you working on next? Please, for the love of God, don't ask artists, actors, musicians, writers, directors this question. We spend the vast majority of our lives not knowing what our next project or gig or paycheck is, and asking what seems to you like an innocuous question can induce a massive existential crisis even on people who appear to be doing well. Same with, oh, have you written, been in, made anything I've seen? Or, are you famous? If you have to ask, the answer is probably no, and now you're just rubbing our faces in it. Some better questions instead. What kind of music do you enjoy playing? Do you prefer theater or film? What do you enjoy most about writing? Is there a mailing list I can sign up for? I'd like to catch your next gig. You get a lot of bonus points for this one. Story 7. My niece and nephew's mom passed away about 6 years ago since they live with me. My niece understands what passing away is and that mom is not coming back. But she took it hard, obviously, and would play passing away on her mother's last day almost every day. She stopped maybe after a while, but would ask random questions about it. My nephew, though, was barely at the right age and didn't understand where mommy was. He would tell me mom was coming soon to come get him when they were going home or asking where mommy is. It was completely heartbreaking seeing these kids so confused and so sad about their mother gone and how their life just changed in a night. Mother passed away during New Year's Eve, and my brother just not wanting to be in the picture really hurt them. It took them a while to understand their circumstances, but eventually they did, and now they're doing pretty well at my house. My niece and nephew have grown up, and I love them like my own children. Story 8. I've got a few of them. Do you have any kids? Or, assuming I do, asking how many I have. None, and I will not have any. I lost a pregnancy that was traumatizing in every way possible, but that is not something many people in my in-person life know. And I'm old enough that people my age all have kids, so everyone just assumes, and they don't know why so inevitably the talk turns to, OMG, you better get on that while you're still young enough, or I get a chiding, why not, when I say I don't have any. Also lovely was a person who asked how many kids I have because I am generously proportioned size-wise, and according to her, that's what happens when you have kids, so she guessed I had several kids. Where'd you get that scar? I've been through some stuff that people don't want to hear about, can't handle hearing about, and sometimes I don't want to elaborate on it. So I'm forced to either make up some lame story about how I got my scars or tell the truth, which almost never ends well because it freaks people out. Also, people asking why I'm wearing pants instead of shorts or long-sleeve shirts instead of a t-shirt in the summer gets tiresome too. Blurting that I've got scars I'm not comfortable with people seeing isn't exactly the answer that shuts down the conversation and more questions. Are you married? No, I was. My ex was a piece of garbage, and at this point, I don't want to get married again, but that doesn't keep me from being wistful about how nice it would have been to meet my current SO back then and actually experience what a happy marriage to the right person would have been like. But yeah, asking if I'm married just brings up all the stuff in my mind that I went through with my ex. It also makes me sad about not ever being married again, even though it's not something I'd ever want to do again. Story 9. Not a question, but a statement. I've worked at a college for the past 11 years. I love working here, but a major factor for staying, even though I've had opportunities to go elsewhere, is that my wife and four young children can take advantage of major tuition remission benefits, 100% for my kids, 90% for my wife on bachelor's level programs. In the long run, it will definitely make up for making less money now. My wife is just about to start a program and be the first of us to take advantage of these benefits. It will equate to more than $12,000 off per semester for 4 semesters. It's a popular accelerator program. I have a good working relationship with the VP of enrollment. We work together often. We aren't friends per se, but certainly get along well. During a conversation on a related topic, I mentioned the fact that my wife was about to start her program without mentioning the discount directly. The VP instantly soured and said in 100% seriousness, "So she's throwing off my numbers," suggesting that my wife's enrollment and discount are ruining all of the enrollment numbers and goals. It was not said as a joke. The conversation ended quickly after that. I don't know if it's real, but since then I think I sense some animosity from this VP, even though this is a college-wide benefit for all full-time employees, and we aren't certainly the only ones taking advantage of it. I work really hard here, and I'm very good at my job. I'm essentially dedicating my career to this place. I do love the college. I also graduated from here and the work and the people I work with, but I believe I'm primarily still here in order to allow my wife and kids to take advantage of this benefit. This incident certainly is not going to make me leave or anything, but it really bummed me out to have someone in leadership respond this way. Story 10. I'm late to this, but I have the perfect answer and want to get it off my chest. My grandfather, on my dad's side, passed away a few years ago, which was a few years after my grandmother. My family cleaned out their house and had a giant tag sale before selling the house. The day of the tag sale, my dad was really down. His parents were gone, and this was his childhood home we were cleaning out and selling off. Towards the end of the day, a woman went to my dad to buy a few things. There was this little cat statuette that was tagged $1. My dad took it in his hands and got all wistful. He said something about the memories the item held and looked just so sad. But he looked up at the woman and said, "I'm glad you're giving it a new home. That makes me happy." And then that woman goes, will you take 50 cents for it?" My dad's face, I swear to God, my heart shattered into a million pieces. He just very sadly nodded and watched her walk away with it, holding his 2 quarters. Like, you couldn't pay the 50 cents extra after hearing the sentimental value it had? Come on. I wanted to run up to her and snatch it back, but I didn't. Ugh, this story still makes me cry up. I love my dad. Story 11. How are you? It's such a mundane, well-intended question most people don't want or expect a real answer. I work at a customer service call center for a major insurance company. I'm asked this question by complete strangers upwards of 100 times a day, in addition to my family members, friends, coworkers. I'm bipolar and I have CPTSD. I'm currently going through one of the worst depressive states I've ever been through. Don't worry, I have a shrink and a therapist, but I don't want to talk about it, hence the throwaway. It's not the fact that I'm lying to the person asking that gets to me either. It's the fact that I cannot even for 2 seconds be distracted from how self-harming I am. Because every single time someone asks me that question, all I can think about is how I want to scream that I'm not okay and that I'd rather be gone than talking to them, or I just want to shut down entirely. There are days I can't come into work because of this stupid little question, because when I hear it, I'm likely to get lost in my head and burst into tears because it's the one completely tiny, insignificant thing that spills over that day. Pretty hard not to invalidate the stuff my head puts me through when it's decided a polite greeting is just too much to handle. Story 12. I work at a gated community as security checking people in for higher income/older retired residents. We only had one entrance and they put it way too close to the main street, so we easily backed up a lot. Sometimes there was a 4 to 5 minute wait to get in, and normal people, contractors, vendors, caregivers would understand. Then there were the residents' kids or friends that were entitled, and they were offended they had a way like everybody else. I would pretend to look for the resident they were visiting for a minute longer, or quote-unquote call the resident, and stay on the phone a minute longer. My all-time favorite is when the rich old woman would pull up in her expensive car and wear all the jewelry and nice clothes. My innocent question to make them crush inside would be, "Are you the cleaning woman?" The looks on their faces? Oh yes, priceless. I love doing it, and the farthest away they were to being the cleaning woman, the better the joke. Story 13. When I was in high school, my dad went to prison for over a year. This was right around the time I was supposed to be learning how to drive. I didn't actually end up getting my driver's license until I was 20. When I did, it was through a driver's ed style course as my dad had lost his license and couldn't be the adult in the car with me. All through junior and senior year, my friends were getting their permits and taking their road tests. My mom tried to teach me, but she was such a nervous wreck that we only went out driving once before she told me she couldn't take me out again. Only my best friend knew where my dad was, so kids in my class used to ask me all the time why I wasn't driving yet. It always made me feel really stupid and incompetent. Even now, when people learn that I didn't start driving until college, I always get asked why, and I have to make up a stupid excuse or flat out tell them it's because my dad wasn't around to teach me. Info I don't often want to volunteer anyway. I've been driving for years now and it rarely comes up, so it doesn't really bother me anymore. But I know my dad feels bad that he wasn't the one who taught me to drive and it took so long for me to learn. Story 14. This was back when I worked as a cell phone salesman. I went to school for IT, and at the time, I couldn't find the job in my field, so I decided to sell cell phones until I found the right position. By nature, I'm not a salesman. I'd rather fix issues and make customers happy rather than tell them their phone was junk and try to sell them something they didn't need. My numbers were down, and our company had a policy where we would ask people personal questions so we could tie it back to their product. I had a hard time with this as the conversations seemed forced and I always felt more natural getting down to why they came into the store that day. Whether they were looking for a new phone or having issues with their current device. Despite not being a great salesman, I was excellent in customer service, always wanted to have the customer leave happy, and in most cases they did. We had to fill out this sheet while we were talking to them and list things like how many kids they have, what they like to do for fun, etc. As you can expect, my sheet didn't have that much information about the customer, more or less what was the reason why they came into the store. My manager sat down with me to address this issue and pulled out all the sheets I've filled out in the last couple of weeks. On each sheet were degrading notes like, "Did you even talk to the person?" or "lack of customer engagement," stuff like that. She then asked me why I was here. I said customer service was my primary concern and I wanted people to feel as though they are respected and to come to someone who doesn't just want to simply sell them something, but to take interest in their problems and find solutions. She then said, "That's not good customer service, and I feel like you are really socially awkward and that's why you can't meet your numbers." That last statement crushed me hard because the only time I would ever be awkward is when I was trying to follow the intrusive policy. I understand where she was coming from though, but I just don't have that salesman spirit, so to speak. Story 15. That one time during my long-term boyfriend and I visited his mom, she kept commenting that he'd lost weight and needed to eat more, which wasn't true. Then she said, "Oh honey, you gained weight. What, maybe 10 pounds?" Which also wasn't true. I'm 5'2" and about 100 pounds, so gaining that much would definitely show. I tried to be polite and just answered, "I've been trying to." Which I guess is technically true. I've been told I should gain weight, but I struggled with growing up and I always felt overweight when I know I'm not. It just stung because I had actually lost weight over the semester and it made me feel crushed that even if I did lose weight, which was unhealthy, people might view me as chubbier. I can't win. Happy update though, I actually gained 10 pounds since then and haven't even thought about my weight in some time. Story 16. This one didn't get to me until years later. When I was in primary school, I went to visit my grandmother with my younger sister and my mother for the weekend. I remember I was sitting in the living room on the floor in front of the TV, and my grandmother and my mother were on the chairs sitting behind me. My grandmother turns to my mom and she says, "Do you know who's coming to visit me this weekend?" My mom says, "No, who?" And she says, "Pat and the kids." So my mom gets up and starts crying her eyes out and leaves the room. My mother's name? Well, her name is Pat. I didn't understand at the time, but my grandmother had shown her first real signs of Alzheimer's. And my grandfather, who had passed a year before, went through the same thing. It always stuck in my brain because of the way my mom reacted. But when I got older and figured out why, I was absolutely crushed. My dad is starting to show it now, and every time it happens, my brain travels back to being that little kid at my grandparents' house again. Cherish every second and every memory you have of your loved ones. You never know when those memories will just not be there anymore. Alright, if you're enjoying the video and you're learning a thing or two from these, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 17. After I broke up with my girlfriend, my mother asked me, "So, who's the next one?" I think she meant it as a joke. This was my first girlfriend, and every other girl I knew was either way too young or already in a relationship. But I could never be sure with her. I broke up with this girl because she was falling in love with me, but I felt nothing for her. I remember our first kiss. She felt her heart stop as the world began spinning around her head. I felt her lips, nothing more. I felt so little that I started wondering if I might actually be confused. And it was this moment that made me realize I had to break up with her. When I did it, I felt terrible. It was like I had gone into that room knowing full well that I would have to hurt a puppy. When I sat next to her, I was praying to God that she didn't say, "I love you," because I knew that if she did that, there would be no way I could break up with her. I hate hurting people, and afterwards, I felt like I was the most selfish person the world had ever seen, so I think you can understand that despite my lack of feelings for this girl, that lighthearted question made me seriously consider disowning my own mother. Story 18. Not something that was asked, but something that was said to me by a child. Last year, I was working at the local science center in partnership with one of the places I work at. Occasionally, I'd get assigned to work there, and I loved every second of it. Working at the science center was a dream come true. I worked with the public, especially with kids, and taught them about 3D printing and did activities with them. I'm so happy that I got to, even temporarily, work there. I remember one day when there was this family who hung around my area for a while and kept coming back to our booth. They were about four little girls with their parents. They were super fun to work with. They often tried to talk to me and ask me random personal questions I barely wanted to answer and said the cutest things. I was glad to see them constantly interested and sticking around. Then right before they left, one of the little girls asked me a question I can't remember and we had a conversation about it. Then she noted how happy I was and always smiling or something. And the last thing she said to me, smiling with that innocent glow, was, "I can't imagine you not happy." As someone who unhappily faces my own personal problems and stress on a daily basis, that kind of broke me inside. I kept up my smile as usual until they scampered out of the science center with their folks. I know that kid was a kind, innocent ball of sunshine and didn't mean anything by it, but man, I felt so empty right after that. I'm just glad it was the end of the day at that point. Story 19. I worked for a relatively small chain of stores in Rhode Island that recently closed their doors after 93 years in business. My father worked with them for 36 years, longer than I've been alive. My brother worked there, met his wife there. I grew up in these stores, grew up with these people. Knowing was all coming to an end was a little devastating, to say the least. The last few months there were pretty sad, as a lot of us were long-time, even lifelong employees for some. Every day leading up to their closing, people would ask, "Is it true? What are you going to do? Do you know when this store will close?" Every day getting asked little questions from sad and confused customers really takes its toll on you, especially when you're just sad and confused as they are. But out of it all, the absolute worst part, watching my dad, who gave his adult life to that company, getting asked the same questions day in and day out, the look on his face when he would see customers that he'd been waiting on forever was like the face on a person at their brother's wake. And that's really the only way to describe what working at Benny's till the end was like, a 3-month wake. Story 20. Why don't I remember that? A little backstory, my uncle gave a speech at my grandfather's funeral about how much he loved the grandchildren and how he would always have cookies in his pockets that he would pull out for them. My parents never married and I was never close with my dad's that side of the family. Plus, he was a black sheep of his family. He is very weird and socially insensitive and doesn't get along with them anyway. So I understand why when I realized I didn't have those memories of my grandfather that my uncle talked about. It was a different story with my sister. She has a different mom than me and is a few months older. There's also something not quite right with her. She's never been diagnosed with anything. I don't think her mom would even want her out of shame. But she is emotionally immature for her age and is very slow to speak full thoughts and understand things. On the ride home from the funeral, she asked my dad about what my uncle was talking about. He basically just explained it the same way as my uncle, and after a few quiet seconds, she asked why she didn't remember that. My father and I both sat in silence. We knew she wouldn't understand the deeper reasons as to why we were treated differently than the rest of the family, and neither of us wanted to try to explain it to her. At first, I was screaming inside why she couldn't understand anything, especially that we'll never be treated the same as the others. Then I realized it wasn't her fault, and most everything bad or unfair that happened to her was a product of her parents' bad choices. It still hurts, though, thinking about it. Story 21. When I was in high school, I went over to my girlfriend's grandmother's house who only spoke Spanish. At the time, I didn't speak Spanish very well, and she asked me a question in front of everyone. I had to ask for the translation, which was, "How come you have all those blemishes on your face?" At the time, I had pretty severe acne, which I was self conscious about, and it just crushed me that I had to have the question repeated back to me in English, and then I calmly replied that I've tried my best to treat it. Of course, this was followed by my girlfriend's older sister trying to give me advice on how to treat it, as if I wasn't already trying my hardest with creams and medications. It crushed me on so many levels, but I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me because I was meeting her for the first time. I thought it was just a very rude question to ask, anyways. P.S. What saved me from my acne? Dove soap as a face wash and zinc pills. Plus, well, my hormones finally started fading down my senior year in high school. Story 22. What's it like having Asperger's? As far as I'm aware, I don't, since this is I'm half afraid I might. About a year and a half ago, a new guy at work was telling me about one of his non-straight friends, but for whatever reason didn't use the word. Instead, he stated he's on your side of the spectrum. I personally found this hilarious, and it became a bit of an inside joke where instead of non-straight, we'd use my side of the spectrum. As the company grew and we hired more people and the joke remained, but no one questioned it, although everyone did know I was not straight. I'm not exactly subtle about it. A few months ago, one of my colleagues' nephews was diagnosed with it, and he decided to ask me, whilst a group of us were smoking, what it was like so he could persuade his sister it wasn't that big of a deal. Cue utter shock from me and a lot of surprise from all the others when I told them I didn't, the original guy didn't smoke. Midway through telling this to a guy I was dating for about 2 months at this point, he told me it was nothing to be ashamed of and that he also had it. When I told him I didn't, he asked whether I'd ever been seen about it before and suggested I should. The more people who know me well tell this story too, the more I discover they've assumed I've have it. Story 23. I look ridiculously young for my age. My oldest stepdaughter was born the year I turned 20. She volunteers where I work, and last week she helped me run an art therapy session for my lower functioning dementia residents. A resident's family member was there as well. We were talking about April birthdays because another resident in that group had a birthday this past weekend, and my daughter mentioned she has her birthday at the end of the month. Someone made some remark about me almost surviving the teen years, and I said my youngest two were only teenagers, so I wasn't out of the woods yet. About 5 minutes later, the family member says, I don't mean to be rude, but how did you get pregnant when you were young, and how come you had 3 kids before you were old enough for high school? You're still young enough that you can get a husband when all your kids graduate high school and have a family, for real. It would have been just irritating if it had been only me, but seeing the look on my stepdaughters' faces when she realized I couldn't really call the family member out for being a schmuck without affecting my job was the crushing part. Story 24. Not a question per se, but when my mom was fading of cancer, she got really loopy from the end-of-life medicine she was on, and presumably her cancer had also spread to her brain. We were staying with her every night in the hospice where she would sleep all day, save for an hour or so where she would be awake and cognitive. However, during the waking hours, she could barely speak and it was usually gibberish. Anyway, she had a bad habit of waking up wide in the middle of the night and trying to get out of bed. She was far too weak, and I had found her a couple of times either about to fall out or with her head stuck on the little tray table beside her while sitting up in an uncomfortable bent-over position, because her head and body were too heavy for her to move at this point. So many times I had to put her back into her bed. She kept telling me she needed to feed animals that had been gone for years. She would call out for her mommy, also gone for years. It was obvious she was regressing, and it almost seemed as though she didn't recognize me. I remember one night it was particularly difficult, and I had to pick her up and put her in bed, basically putting her down gently while she screamed for her mom. I remember I said something like, "It's me, your son. Don't you trust me?" She looked at me like I was a complete stranger with near fear in her eyes and shouted, "No!" She then proceeded to call out to her mom again. I had to walk away and let my sister take over as I just started bawling. I'll never forget that moment for as long as I live. It haunts me. Story 25. Where do you work? As someone with both disabilities, severe back pain, major depression, anxiety, I've had to become very upfront about it. Like, thank God we live in 2018 and onwards where I can say I don't because, and for the most part, at worst, I get, "Oh, you poor thing," or "Don't feel bad, you're doing the best you can." I can only very rarely get the "You're the scum of the earth for not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you parasite" kind of response, but man, the fear of it. Thankfully, I am struggling actively to get over it, get my life in a better, happier place. Still, the worst response I get is pity or silence when people ask me a very valid question. Also, the main reason I can't bring myself to join the dating pool, I'm still trying to face the "I don't think I am worth dating. How can I expect to present myself as such?" Story 26. My younger cousin was looking to go to school for architecture or industrial design. And since I happened to have already gone through art school, they asked if I wanted to come along with them when he went for a campus visit so I could guest speak from a student's perspective. I don't have a great relationship with some of my family, and I was, and still am, dealing with some pretty heavy inferiority complexes because of it. Lots of feelings like no one actually likes me or wants to spend time with me, etc. So we get there, and I'm happy and excited for my cousin, and I'm pretty chatty because I am in my element and excited to show my cousin around when I hear my uncle whisper to my aunt, "Jesus, she sure is her father's daughter. She hasn't closed her mouth since we got in the car." My dad has a drinking problem. He mumbles endlessly regardless if anyone is listening or not. I've walked away mid-conversation, a very one-sided one, and he didn't miss a beat. So having my excited chatter with my cousin compared to the endless mumbling of an intoxicated old man effectively squashed any enthusiasm I had that day and for some time going forward. Story 27. I'm a delivery driver, get asked a lot if I go to school. What they don't know is I got a degree in medical assisting after being jobless for 2 years trying to find work in the field I went to school for, patient care tech. Got a job at a hospital and stayed for a couple of years. Tried going to nursing school while working, but when school changed my schedule, I couldn't work around it, so I quit school, went to a different college. Between my best friend passing and the ride to work, I moved closer. But then I didn't have as much help with my child, previously lived with my grandmother. I was then alone with him and tight for money. I fell behind on my studies and left after failing a class. Moved to Florida to get a fresh start with my mom. Got a job at a call center and went back to school for medical assistance to get my associates. I had some serious medical issues and kind of fell into a depression after that. Got the job where I am now and everything in my life started to crumble. I got depressed and dropped out. I've made a lot of excuses as to why this last time because I felt life was such a failure, and now here I am at your doorstep with your food in this junk car with no AC, no power steering, and breaks down once a week. So I just lie and say yes and make something up as I don't want them to view me as a failure at life. I really love my job, but all too often I feel like I've failed at life. Story 28. Way too late, but anyway. I was working at Staples one day when a woman and her kid asked me a question about a product. While I was answering, the boy straight up stops me out and asks me, "You look weird. Do you have a handicap?" Now, I must say that I was a little stunned because I don't have any disability of any sort, and it was the first time in my life that someone asked me something like that. To make things worse, while I was processing his question, his mother said to him, "Hey, it's not nice to say that to disabled people." I literally started laughing and said that I don't have any disabilities and to not worry about it because kids sometimes have weird questions. Haven't actually said that last bit. After that, she thanked me and got away. I told it to my colleague and best friend and he laughed it off. I was really wondering what made him say that. Oh, and she came back to me a little later asking her boy to make his excuses. Again, I said that I didn't have any disability and it was all right. That was a weird evening. Story 29. My papa and granny were the happiest wee Scottish couple. They were each other's everything, 3 children in poverty. They overcame everything together and loved each other completely. My granny started getting forgetful and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My grandfather doted on her even when he was progressively getting worse himself. He was right there during her cancer and her triple bypass. He walked with her every day, laid out her PJs every day, and picked her flowers. He was her rock and she was his sunshine, but as fate would have it, he suddenly passed away. We tried to explain this to my granny, who understood, but then would ask where Papa was 10 minutes later. At my Papa's funeral, the Lord's Prayer was played. My dear granny stood up, clapped along, and sang happily. She then said, "Where's Papa? This is his favorite hymn." My uncle had to sit her down and tell her we were at his funeral. "Oh no, who is gone, dear?" "Papa is, Granny." I think the most heartbreaking part was at the afternoon tea we had after the funeral. "Where is Papa?" "His favorite biscuits are here." Even after telling her again, she still laid out a cup for his tea and his favorite biscuits. "He'll be here soon. I've saved him his favorite biscuits." "Where is Papa, dear?" will forever be one of the most soul-crushing questions for me. Aw man, this might be the story that makes me shed a few tears. I mean, I'm not crying, but someone is preparing onions beside me, you know? Story 30. Are you going to sleep? I work evenings and nights most days. I wake up at 1:45 p.m. to go to work at 3 p.m. and work until 5 a.m., come home and clean a bit and help my wife get ready for work, in bed 7:45, asleep at 8 usually. Or when I'm just working an 8-hour overnight shift, I come home at 6 a.m. and nap for a bit. Some days I'm just so tired and cranky, all I can think about is sleep. I feel awful knowing that some of the time I have at home is wasted in sleep. It really ruins my life. I know I can quit a job and find better work, but I don't know. Don't want to be evicted or lose a car. My wife's kids' car and motorcycle always needs something or repair. So when they ask me, "Are you going to sleep?" I say yes. Oftentimes I'm mad because I can't express that I need it, that I can feel my heart flutter or feel dizzy after being up for 20 hours knowing I'll only get 4 hours of sleep, 6 if I'm lucky. I'm trying not to fail them financially so they can have a roof and a car and all the things they need. Story 31. What nationality are you? If I knew, I'd tell them. My mom doesn't know if she got pregnant by her boyfriend or her husband. Usually she picks her husband to make her look okay, but it does make me wonder when I get asked and I feel sad not knowing for sure. It's something you can go through life not thinking about and being okay with till someone asks and it brings the strange feelings back. Hoping DNA testing gets cheaper and I can afford to get one done with one of my sisters. I could be a full sister or half sister to all 5 of them. Mom's husband thinks I'm his and I called him dad while he was around. He left to live back in Holland and we never saw him again. The boyfriend thinks I'm his and never wanted to know me. Who tells 2 guys they're someone's dad? The crushing part is more that neither of the 2 gives a care about me. Their loss in the end is I have 4 beautiful daughters of my own who would be awesome grandkids and they've missed out. Story 32. So what brought you here? I get asked all the time and it's hard to avoid. I usually have to give a heavily edited version of events along with a white lie. I went to a brewing program in Canada in 2013 to chase my dreams of becoming a brewmaster and opening a brewery. In 2015, I graduated and got my first job running a 5 BBL brewery, average size for a micro brew pub. The money wasn't right. I was going into debt because I couldn't repay my loans and pay rent and have medical insurance. I struggled for a long time at that first job. I ended up meeting and dating someone great though. After dating for 6 months, I got an offer for a dream job in Arizona, 2,000 miles from my home in Michigan. With my SO's blessing, I moved cross-country and continued to pursue my dreams. So I end up in this town that appears quaint, then I quickly realize it's a bad place. My new boss, who promised me the moon, turns out to be a manipulative snake. I continue struggling, working for very little pay because this brewery that's supposed to be built by the time I arrive has barely broken ground. I arrived in November and quit at the end of March because my financial situation is putting me down, my boss keeps gaslighting me, and my girlfriend back in Michigan is miserable with the long distance. Meanwhile, my girlfriend has been looking for work in Arizona. A couple of weeks after I quit the second brewery, she got an offer for an in-person interview in Flagstaff, 2 hours away from my place. So I'm in limbo, trying to figure out if I should move home or stay when she gets this interview. She ended up getting the job, so we both moved to Flagstaff, where we are today. So when people ask what brought me here, it really was a path that involved broken dreams and weeks of uncertainty and bad thoughts. It involved $10,000 in credit card debt brought on by a trashy person and a year of deferred student loans. This is why I say, she got an offer here and we moved. My last job wasn't enough to tie me down, so I was open to new opportunities. Alright, if you connect with any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.